Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join Redshift today for a discussion about Microsoft's new bulk email sender requirements. And we'll also delve into some other topics surrounding email sender requirements generally, and then some prognostications for the future. Again, thank you for taking the time. A few housekeeping items. Yes, the webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a copy in your inbox shortly after we're done. And you'll also receive a guide, Redshift's guide to email sender requirements generally. So I hope both of those assets will be of use to you. If you have any questions during this time, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll answer those at the end and maybe during the presentation as we go. So I'm Brian Westnage, look after alliances and partnerships here at Redshift. I work with all of our data partners, technical alliances, email service providers, and other partners that Redshift has in the email authentication, deliverability, and broader email security space. Been working kind of in email deliverability and authentication for the last 20 years, and been at Redshift for the last 4. So again, thanks for taking the time, and I will let my esteemed co-presenter introduce himself.
I am Udeme. I am Brian's co-presenter today. Pleasure to see everyone that we cannot see. We've been in the industry for probably about the same amount of years, give or take a couple of weeks difference. So Brian, I didn't want to tell you to make you laugh earlier, but I'm telling you now. I started my career at Yahoo back around 2005 or 6. One of the postmasters that remediate sender issues when they come up. So like most of us know, Yahoo is one of the large receivers that have enforced tighter authentication requirements in the last 1 to 2 years or so with other ISPs. My experience, slightly similar background. One thing Brian did not mention is he loves tennis and plays tennis. So do I. From Yahoo, I've worked with a couple of senders as well. So I'm kind of like not really an octopus in the industry, but a couple of receivers, a couple of senders. I've gotten to have the pleasure of see different sides of the ecosystem, think a little differently than, let's say, someone that's worked at a sender for the last 2,000 years. So I can compare and contrast as the need arises. And today we'll be talking about Microsoft's new requirements. One thing that I think is on our LinkedIn profiles is tennis, mentioned earlier, but I'm also a professional tennis referee. Email Virtuoso is a little side project that I have mostly to help senders remediate issues. So if you need any help, not to overcast Redshift, but I am an unemployed deliverability freelancer as well. So with that, let's get to it, Brian.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm not a tennis referee like you, probably a poorer tennis player, but I do enjoy tennis. One thing you didn't mention is we like to think of ourselves as the Bimmy brothers because we've done presentations on Bimmy in the past. No one else calls us that, but I think we like that moniker, and we may just have to use it.
Yep.
Going forward. But again, thank you for taking the time today. Certainly the primary purpose of today is to talk a little bit about Microsoft's requirements. Then how do they compare with the existing requirements that many folks are familiar with around Google and what Google and Yahoo have in place? What do we feel the impact, or what have we seen the effect of these requirements on adoption of email authentication by marketers and other domain owners, and then our predictions for how this might shape both DMARC and then even Bimmy going forward as well. So that is what is on tap. And certainly we will start with what most folks saw last month, which a lot of us have been expecting for some time. We are members of, my Bimmy brother and I are both members of an organization called MOG, which is where industry standards like SPF and DMARC and Bimmy were discussed and or formulated and or promoted. And certainly in MOG, I think we probably started hearing about sender requirements, Microsoft following suit with Google and Yahoo probably over a year and a half ago. So we were really excited when they finally published their blog last month saying, hey, this is where we're going with our consumer domains first, outlook.com, live.com, hotmail.com. But certainly my experience has been, and Udoma may feel the same way, Microsoft has kind of lagged the rest of the mailbox provider space, generally around email authentication. So those of you who have been around a long time, like my Bimmy brother and I, you may remember a standard that Microsoft promoted called Sender ID, which was supposed to be another version of SPF. They tried that for a few years, eventually abandoned that. In the DMARC space, it took them quite some time to send DMARC reports for Office 365 domains. Took a while for them to enforce a DMARC reject policy. If you'd specified that in your DNS for your domain, Microsoft didn't actually apply that reject policy until relatively recently. So I wasn't totally surprised that they let Google and Yahoo take the lead, kind of blaze the trail with these sender requirements, and then they decided to kind of follow suit, with some learnings, and frankly let Google and Yahoo take some slings and arrows before they got into the space. But Udoma, I mean, you're well positioned in this space, as you mentioned. You've worked on the sending side of things, you've worked on the receiver side of things, and now you work kind of with both constituencies to kind of bridge the gap. But is that kind of your feeling? Microsoft and working with them on deliverability issues for customers, they've kind of taken lead from Google and Yahoo and others first.
Yes, thanks for the question, Brian. So one interesting way to look at it is, like Brian said, when anybody puts themselves in the foot of any receiver on the internet, be it small, medium, large, when there's a delivery issue for a sender, the first thing is most times probably freak out or worry, or I don't know, whatever it may be. But also it's nice to understand and put ourselves in the feet of Hotmail in this case, specifically for today's webinar, or Google or Microsoft from previous enforcement requirements. They have to protect their consumers, which are their users, which are, let's say, my mother-in-law, for example, she has a Hotmail address. Every time that she receives some sensitive type mail that is spam, call it what may, I won't go into details. There's a gazillion things that Microsoft on their site will look at to protect mother-in-law's mailbox. For everybody on the webinar today, think about your personal mailbox, be it a Google, gmail.com address, or the old school Netscape email mailbox. Think about, they're not just email addresses for fun. Just like countries have immigration to protect the country, Redshift does a lot of cybersecurity protection stuff for their customers, but think about it from Microsoft's point of view, where they have to protect mother-in-law, neighbor, you call it. So these requirements, when they come out and there's delivery issues, it's not to frustrate senders, it's to protect the internet ecosystem per se. So one thing that I think is nice to call out for the webinar and even afterwards as well. But Brian?
That's a great point. I think these sender requirements, what we all need to remember is most of the email traffic, and you know this well from working on the mailbox provider side of the business, is most of the email traffic coming into Google and Yahoo and Microsoft networks is not good email. It's not one-to-one communication between you and your mother-in-law. It's not legitimate communications from brands to their customers. It's actually malicious mail. It's spam, it's viruses, it's phishing. So Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo are putting up barriers to protect their users from unwanted email. And part of discerning whether or not a message is legitimate or not, or wanted or not, is authenticating that mail. So that's one thing that the domain owner can do, the sender of the message can do to indicate that the message is legitimate and wanted, is by authenticating it. So really, I think of these sender requirements as making more formal and required, if you will, versus some things that were always a best practice that deliverability experts like us would talk about to folks, like, you should do this. This is a best practice. Now it's, you must do this if you want your mail to get required. So they're just ratcheting down, the environment and trying to make it a better experience for their users, people that have email addresses at Hotmail, at gmail.com, at yahoo.com. That's what the mailbox providers are trying to protect, and keeping bad stuff out, unwanted email out, and allowing good, authentic, wanted email in. And this is one piece of that. Certainly, we could have a whole other webinar on all of the other pieces of email deliverability, the other science aspects of deliverability, the art of email deliverability. How do you send email that people want and don't complain about? So that would be a whole other topic. But really, I think these requirements is making something strict that was always recommended, but is now required. And really, what is that? Well, many of the folks on the call, if not all of you, will kind of have heard of these. Microsoft, I guess we should have started with, is not instituting something brand new that is outside of what Google and Yahoo have already said is required to gain access to their environments. It really is, you must have SPF in place for the sending domain, you must have DKIM in place, and you must pass DMARC with either SPF or DKIM. That means you must, your SPF domain or your DKIM domain must be the same domain as the visible from domain, and then you must have a DMARC record in place with a policy of none. Udama, any comment on that piece?
Yes. So one interesting thing to consider as well for everybody in the webinar is just throwing in a bunch of DNS records for either of the three protocols is not the key, but creating the proper SPF records, the proper DKIM key record, the proper DMARC related record. So for example, one interesting one that I've seen from a municipality for over 3 years, and I've been begging them that it's wrong, is their DMARC policy is at the lowest of the three, which is P equals none on the screen. And then the RU address is where aggregate data will go to, points to their info@cityhall.com address. So the reason why I bring that up is because I think a few minutes ago we talked about enforcing all the proper protocols. Sure, but properly enforcing them is key. For example, what if I created a DMARC policy and set the aggregate data to point to my wife, and I send millions of email a day? I think we all know that by bedtime, the keys to the lock could be changed. That's an example. Probably a joke, but think about it in the sense that properly setting up a DMARC record is key, not just for the sake of P equals none pointed somewhere, but there's many ways to read DMARC data, whether you have XML formats or Redshift provides a great platform that you could take all the crazy analytics and create some pretty painting looking, fancy looking dashboard that you can actually dig through and say, oh, company A is trying to impersonate domain abc.com, something like that. The SPF piece is a good example where I think in the protocol standards, sometimes we've seen SPF records that have 90 plus lookups, which is not good. The recommended one is 10 or less SPF lookups for obvious reasons. DKIM is another thing. So we can create any type of DKIM key, but the length also matters, be it 1024, 2048, or, Brian years ago, 512. So that's too short, higher risk of getting cracked, stuff like that. So the requirements are great, but doing them right is great as well. And I'd rather take the time of one extra day to do it right than rush in 2 seconds and do it wrong. So Brian, go ahead.
That makes complete sense. Measure twice, cut once, if you will, from a DNS record perspective.
Yeah.
So the one I found with Microsoft's announcement, one very interesting recommendation they made. They didn't clearly label it as a requirement, but they said this is a recommendation. And the other three are kind of consistent with Google and Yahoo said. But the first thing they came out very explicitly and said, hey, we recommend that your from or your reply to address is valid and can receive replies. So that is something new, really, in the whole requirement field that I've seen. Is again something that delivery experts have recommended for a long time. Is don't use no reply at as your from address, or don't say this domain is not monitored and can't receive emails. Microsoft is really now just saying, hey, that's a really bad practice. If you're going to send email, you should expect to get responses. So let's make sure you're from, or if you designate a reply to address, make sure those align with your sending domain and can actually receive mail. It seems kind of silly, but I think not only will this serve you well in terms of complying with these sender requirements, I think it's a much better user experience as well for people that receive mail from you. Does that kind of line up with your feeling?
Yes, and I believe Google has said something similar a couple of months ago as well, over time, where don't look like a spammer. So the more legitimate you would look to their systems, to their technology, for any mailbox provider, put yourself in their shoes of, for example, Brian and I were discussing a couple of minutes ago about a client I had a few months ago that had a delivery issue and wanted to just rotate the domain out and turn on a new one. I said, no. Think about when you don't sleep well at night before. You may wake up with a headache. You may be drowsy all day. Something causes something. So from a deliverability standpoint and authentication in this piece, if a domain name has a delivery issue, don't rush to rotate and put in a new one, because you have to warm up the IP, the infrastructure. I would rather take the time to figure out what caused the problem and then remediate the issue, reach out to the ISP in question, maybe Hotmail this time, and fix the problem versus run around to rotate, because you've not fixed the problem. You're just rotating different tires on a car per se, driving the car, but different sizes. But what if it's an oil change diagnosis? I'm just giving examples, but yeah. So Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fair. You want to address the root cause of the issue, or else you're just going to encounter the same issue on your new shiny lookalike domain that you've spun up. So you can't get around that. And again, that's behavior that we've seen over time that is consistent with spammer behaviors, using a domain for a while, burning and churning through it, and then because you've run into delivery issues, spinning up a new domain and then sending mail from that. So you look like a spammer when you do that, or worse. So if you send permission-based wanted email, don't look like a spammer, and don't, if you run into issues, you're going to have to address them rather than just trying to, they're going to follow you. If you keep the same practices but expect a different result, you're not going to get a different result. As those of us who are also parents can attest to, it's like, hey, doing the same thing over and over expecting a different result isn't going to work out well. So don't if you think about Groundhog Day, don't do the same thing over and over, expect the results to be different. And also, in terms of Groundhog Day, the Microsoft requirements are going to feel a lot like the Google and Yahoo requirements, and that's not. I'm sure that wasn't unintentional on Microsoft's part. They didn't want to do something that wildly, diverged from what Google and Yahoo were doing. Microsoft, Google, and Yahoo are all part of MOG, so they go to the same events we do. They're in parts of the same discussions. So, it stands to reason that they weren't gonna do anything wildly differently from what Google and Yahoo were doing. Their timeline was interesting. They came to the party a little late, shall we say, but then they were aggressive about when these requirements were going to come into effect. So we can drill down on that a little bit and the different requirements. But the biggest thing about Microsoft is they published a blog post on April 2nd and said, these are requirements. And then they said, hey, these are going to effect on May 5th. So Google and Yahoo both gave several months for senders to kind of become familiar with the requirements, to ramp up to them, to start publishing, let's say, DKIM for domains that didn't have DKIM, or for many senders, publishing a DMARC record of any kind for their sending domains. So Microsoft, was kind of assuming that people who had gotten into compliance for Google and Yahoo were probably going to be in pretty good shape for sending mail into their consumer environments as well. So this is where, just to be really specific, both Google and Microsoft said, hey, these apply to our consumer domains first, so not Microsoft 365 corporate domains, not Google Workspace corporate domains, literally gmail.com, outlook.com, etc. And they said you must be a bulk sender to be subject to these requirements, and that's somebody sending more than 5,000 emails into their environments, both from the top level domain and any subdomain. So really that's been pretty consistent. Yahoo didn't give a particular volume requirement, but I think it's fair to assume that you should be, if you send in the neighborhood of 5,000 messages a day, you're probably going to be subject to these requirements. And you must pass SPF and DKIM and pass DMARC and have a DMARC policy with a policy done. I thought of this past May 5th, so a lot of us, celebrate Cinco de Mayo, especially in North America. I thought of it as Cinco de no Mailo if you did not send according to Microsoft's requirements, but I haven't yet heard in Udema, if you've heard differently in some of the other email circles we're both in, I haven't heard of any just massive problems with people running into mail getting rejected at Microsoft, because Microsoft came out of the gate and originally said, hey, we're going to junk anything that doesn't comply with these requirements, and then amended that a little over a week ago and said, hey, we're actually going to reject mail out of the gate on May 5th. I haven't heard of widespread delivery issues for people who have said, oh my gosh, I'm being blocked at Microsoft consumer domains. Have you heard that? Anything like that yourself?
I'm on the same page. I've not heard. I took one of our domains that I have at home for testing purposes, and I played around, and I will let Microsoft speak for themselves. I didn't see anything yet, so we'll see what happens. And it's great that you pointed out the little change that Microsoft did before Cinco to Microsoft, Faisal. I saw what you said in chat. What was I going to say? Yeah, so I think, like you said, at first they were going to drop non-compliant mail to the junk folder for the Microsoft-specific consumers, and then they changed their mind and said, no, we're just going to go full reject mode. So I've seen a little chatter here and there, but nothing really specific. And I mean, maybe it's just because it's a coincidence with Cinco de Mayo, Cinco de Microsoft, or everybody turned off all the Hotmail-bound mail flow for the last 48 hours. So who knows? Yeah.
I tend to think, and for those of you that are on the call that had to do this, I tend to think that people that got their domains in order to comply with Google and Yahoo, did the right things, authenticated their mail, and this was a relative non-event. There's always going to be the outliers, right? But I'm willing to bet the 80-20 rule will apply to this, and 80% of the people sending mail into Microsoft consumer domains on May 5th saw no issue. And then there's a few of the outliers who maybe there were people that targeted Microsoft domains over Gmail domains and they ran into issues. There's always going to be a few outliers, but I think just the notoriety of the Yahoo requirements, the fact that they were phased in over a period of months, people had time to get ready. Marketers worked with their email service providers to get ready. I think marketers in some ways evangelize DMARC to areas of the organization that might not have been familiar with DMARC even. Because the marketer was saying, hey, we got to comply with these things. Maybe their IT team that worked with their corporate mail environment was familiar with SPF and DKIM, but wasn't familiar with DMARC. I think marketers probably raised awareness within their organizations to a much greater degree than they had before when these guidelines were not required but just recommended. So kudos to those of you on the call who got ready. And again, I think it's been a relative non-event thus far. We'll see. Obviously, all of us continue to kind of monitor this very closely, but for now, I think from a consumer mailbox perspective, if your domain was already compliant with Google and Yahoo, you're in pretty good shape with Microsoft, except for the aforementioned, hey, make sure your from and your reply to addresses can receive mail.
I see. Thank you, Brian. Sorry, my big eyeball saw something. Someone asked if we believe there's a chance Microsoft will also introduce changes to SNDS and or a different new tool to help monitoring and deliverability analytics like Google's Postmaster tools. I could share an idea and then Brian can share his as well. So one thing that is nice to consider is we can speculate so much, and then it's up to the Microsofts, the Googles, the Yahoos on what they want to do. So my answer is I don't know. SNDS and the junk mail reporting program are nice tools for senders to use to get better forensics into their email deliverability flow. But Brian, what do you think? You think SNDS will vanish or stick around with better lipstick? What do you think?
I think more the latter. I think Google Postmaster Tools is certainly probably has the most features, if you will, for email senders to get visibility into how their mail is treated in relation to these requirements. I think it's kind of it is the cutting edge around domain monitoring, network monitoring, if you will. I would expect to see enhancements to SNDS over time to kind of follow what Postmaster Tools has kind of added and refined and enhanced over the last couple of years. And then will we see similar tools like that from other providers? I think that's not out of the realm of possibility. But I think both of us would probably encourage anybody on the call who hasn't set up Google Postmaster Tools, please do so, and you'll really get some granular visibility into why you might be having delivery issues at Gmail if you are. So I don't think I haven't heard any specific chatter either in various email Slack groups we're all in or in MOG on enhancements to SNDS, but I would have to imagine there probably will come.
And that's a great question. Yeah,
that was great. And then Chip, thanks for jumping in the comments about you've seen Spamhaus blocks at Microsoft the past month, which is interesting because there's no requirement from Yahoosoft in any way that you can't be on a specific block list, but when you're on a major block list because you start seeing delivery issues and you see the block list referenced in your SMTP responses. So yes, you want to stay off block list, no doubt. And if you find that your mail is affected by being on specific block lists, you want to address the root issues. But from a sender requirements perspective, I haven't seen anything that says stay off block list, but that is always a best practice.
And I could probably add to what you said as well, that for Microsoft-specific technical enforcements around authentication, there's a specific error code that they will publish. Something about access denied, blah, 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 sending domain abc.com does not meet the required authentication level. So if folks can, if you check Redsys announcements associated to this, I think there's 2 or 3 I remember seeing. and then that hyperlinks to the Microsoft article, and you dig further in the middle, it's right there. You see it. There's a specific error code. So, yep.
Yep. Good stuff. All right. Well, what's been the impact of Microsoft's requirements and really Google and Yahoo's dating back to I think they announced their requirements at the end of 2023, and then obviously they start going into effect, I think, in February of 2024. So what we've kind of seen in our data is, just a drastic increase in DMARC record adoption since these announcements. So in January 2024, we saw around 8 million domains with any kind of DMARC record, and then as of this month, that's jumped to almost 11 million. So, certainly that increase is probably due in large part, if not almost all, is due to these requirements that you have to have a DMARC record in place with a policy of none. We noticed in just kind of keeping track since the Microsoft announcement in early April, we noticed in the 30 days after that announcement, there's about 400,000 new DMARC records created in DNS, and we scan roughly 70 million records a day and look for SPF, DKIM, DMARC records, BIMI records, etc. If you're interested in any of that data, it's at a website called BIMIRadar.com. So we originally started as a site to monitor BIMI adoption, but it kind of has a broader purpose in looking at email authentication adoption over time. So yeah, we really saw, the Yahoo goal requirements really force people into creating DMARC records if they hadn't created those yet. So I think the evolution of this, we'll talk a little bit about that next, is where do we go from here? What do we see as kind of the future around email authentication, and where's that hockey stick going to move now that we see so many domains with DMARC records? Of course, spammers follow some best practices as well. So it's not just legitimate centers that have published DMARC records. It is people that might be spammers and malicious actors. They're marketers as well, just in a different way. They want people to interact with their malicious campaigns just like people interact with legitimate brand campaigns. So there's all sorts of things you want to do to from a deliverability perspective to make sure you don't look like those bad folks. But I think most legitimate marketers are doing a good job of complying with the bare minimum requirements of Yahoo Soft.
Yep. Brian, could you help me move the slide? My keyboard froze. Yeah. You can blame me, the tennis guy. So.
Oh, I can't blame you. Do you see the hockey stick, or you don't? The graph?
Yep. Oh, yeah. I see that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So this graph is interesting. So kind of the top line is any domain with a DMARC record of any kind, and then the two other graphs are people who are at DMARC enforcement, so policy of quarantine or reject. So they qualify for BIMI, and then the very bottom line is people with BIMI and VMCs, BIMI records with a VMC. So kind of interesting, bare minimum DMARC record policy none, and then you can get a little stricter.
And I could probably add some sugar to the hockey stick you just said. So it's interesting because at a past employer, one of the jobs I had was to figure out some stuff that didn't exist. And one interesting project that I created was, think about DMARC like going to the dentist, going to the doctor, going on vacation. Think about if we strip that out of our lives, we probably all go nuts. But we should also look at authentication the same way. So like the DMARC adoption stuff from BIMIRadar.com is great. Or like I see in chat, someone mentioned that P equals none is not enough. That's a good point. Even when at the past employer, there were X number of domains at certain DMARC level, policy level, I wasn't satisfied with that. Every X weeks or days or months, I would go back and take a look at everything and say, oh, what's changed? The reason why I bring this up, Brian, is because a domain name may have a purpose today, and the purpose could change in 6 months. So let's say purple shirt contests. It's spring in the US. I want everybody on this call to get a free purple shirt, and I'll set up purpleshirt.com. If I'm going to use it to send mail, I should have, specific SPF and DKIM and DMARC records in place. After June 1, only because that's my birthday month, and I think, Brian, I can't remember your birthday, but I don't need to sell the purple shirts anymore. Those authentication policies should change. I could have like a null SPF, null DKIM, and then a specific DMARC record. So this is the dentist doctor vacation analogy example that I'm using to say, or we're using to say that it just doesn't stop at P equals none. It doesn't stop at P equals quarantine. It doesn't stop at rejects. Domains have certain purposes at specific times, depending on the day, the month, the year. So adoption is great, but put that at the back of your mind as well. Brian, sorry.
Great point. And that segues nicely into our next segment, where we're going to just, kind of look into our crystal ball for what the future might hold around DMARC and email authentication generally. So I think it's fair to say that we're going to see more providers adopt bulk sender requirements. So I'm calling on Comcast here only because I think they're experimenting with BIMI right now, and I think it's they do a great job of participating in all the industry orgs that we do, and I think and just myself being based in North America, I'm very familiar with them as a provider. They're my own internet service provider at home, so I think it's fair to expect more North American-based providers to adopt these. I think it's fair to expect more regional providers in Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, South America. I think it's fair to say that this is going to be it'll be more likely than not that these requirements will be enforced everywhere. And we didn't even mention Apple's requirements. So Apple more quietly published their own kind of sender requirements too for getting delivered to their consumer domains like iCloud.com, me.com, mac.com, et cetera. So they've done the same thing, just with a little less fanfare. But it's the cat's out of the box, genie's out of the lamp, whatever you want to say. It's not going back. We're not going back to a world where authentication is just recommended. I think a lot of us who have been in the deliverability space for a long time have talked about a concept of no authentication, no entry into mailbox provider environments, and that really is here, and I don't think that's ever going back.
Yep. And if the folks on the webinar are curious to see what Brand just mentioned, you could Google no auth, no entry. That was a clause or phrase used and played around, started a couple years ago, and I think it's still around, where it basically means no authentication, no delivery, or no entry to mailbox provider ABC. So,
yeah. They're not messing around anymore. I think it's that time is here, and it's just going to continue at other providers, the long tail of other regional providers, where you still care about getting your mail delivered to. All right, so what else might we see? Well, these requirements have been fairly specific about, hey, these only apply to bulk senders, and they only apply to people who send mail to consumer environments like gmail.com versus Google Workspace, and outlook.com and hotmail.com versus Microsoft 365 corporate domains. So I think it's fair to say that we'll see these standards applied to those B2B domains, if you will, and that it'll apply to any volume of email sent into those environments, not just quote unquote bulk senders. Is that kind of the way you feel?
Yes, I agree as well. And we should also keep in mind that probably to mesh it into our predictions as we are talking about this as well. But I remember back in the day when I worked at Yahoo 2,000 years ago. Just kidding, I'm not that old. Back then, a lot of weight was mostly on IP addresses, and domain weight wasn't pretty heavy back then. But if we look at the last half to full decade, 5 to 10 years, we can see that curve in like DMARC adoption graph you shared, but also domain reputation is carrying more weight now. And it could be anything from fish links or non-fishy links to authentication to you name it. Think about it. Warm-ups. It's not just an IP warm-up thing anymore. Domains have a play. Little things like that. So we could see that adoptive drive and domain reputation grow as well. So.
Yep, agreed. And just saw this question in the chat, so that was timely as well. As I think ESPs and of course mailbox providers will drive more stringent DMARC requirements. I'm not aware of any ESP. I think Dave, you had asked in the chat, like, does any email service provider? So if you hire somebody to send your email, are they not going to send it if you only have a DMARC policy of none? No, I don't think that's the case. As long as you have a DMARC policy of none. One thing I didn't mention is I expect to see an increase in potentially requiring you to send DMARC reports somewhere. I mean, that sounds kind of silly,
Yeah.
and you touched on it, Udema, but the bare minimum today is a DMARC record with a policy of none. So it's not actually required that you send reports anywhere. Well, that's kind of silly because DMARC reports, the reason for having a DMARC record, one of the main reasons is the R in DMARC, to get a report about your domain and how it authenticates, because otherwise you're flying blind. So yes, you want to get reports, right? So I expect that to be a requirement going forward. I expect the mailbox providers to say, hey, you need to send the DMARC report somewhere, whether it's a service provider like Redshift on DMARC or whether you ingest the XML reports to an internal mailbox. You're going to have to do that. And I think it's fair to expect that people, both mailbox providers and maybe email service providers, are going to say, hey, you need to get to a point where you're comfortable enforcing a quarantine or reject policy. Is that kind of the way you feel?
Yes, I agree. And probably I shared the example too early in the webinar, but it makes sense of, for now, the basics work, but in the future, I could see a predictive scenario where setting up reports to go somewhere that makes sense is key. So for example, yeah. I won't go too deep into detail, but to answer, to add to what Dave mentioned, so I think I don't think ESPs would necessarily track currently who does what, but I think it's more of a standardized requirement of checklist, checkbox, yes, no scenario. So for another example we can look at is an RUA destination. RUF, sorry, is not necessarily required, but depending on our opinions and feelings, we could say yes, no, maybe type of thing. But that's a whole different cookie apart from the webinar. So I won't go there. That's a rabbit hole. Yeah.
Well, there's a good point that Chip made in the chat, which was like, don't stay at a DMARC policy none forever, because you are still open for impersonation. So you might get visibility from the DMARC reports, but you can still be spoofed. So there's lots of great reasons where you want to move off that P equals none. Don't stay there forever, because the bad guys can look at your DMARC policy just as easily as Google and Yahoo and Microsoft can. And if I'm a malicious actor, I'm much more likely to spoof somebody that has a DMARC policy of none than I am to spoof somebody with a DMARC policy of quarantine and reject. That because my malicious campaign is much more likely to get to the recipient if I spoof somebody with a DMARC policy of none or no DMARC record. So I'd say before the Google and Yahoo requirements were rolled out, a lot of folks thought, well, maybe I'll DMARC's great. It's good if I've had some sort of spoofing issue, or I'm applying for cybersecurity insurance, or I'm in financial services, I'm heavily targeted. But there's a lot of reasons why you want to progress your DMARC policy now. And there's really no downside once you get visibility. The key is the visibility. So one thing we didn't even touch on is a lot of the DMARC records created post Yahoo and Google announcement were literally the bare minimum: a DMARC text record with a policy of none and no reporting sent anywhere. So you don't want to be that domain that put a record in place, or worse, set a policy of quarantine or reject with no reporting addresses. We saw a lot of that. People are like, oh, this is great. If I might as well set my DMARC policy to reject or quarantine because I'm going to block bad mail. Well, yes, you're going to block bad mail and you're going to block your legitimate mail that doesn't authenticate properly. So you always want to progress from a policy of none, get the visibility you need, authenticate all the good email, and then when you're ready, block the bad stuff by getting to quarantine.
I see an interesting question in chat that may align with your next prediction.
Oh,
so
perfect.
Shelby asked if it makes sense to start at a DMARC policy higher than P equals none. Answer is, it depends. The purple shirt example I gave a few minutes ago, so I have had scenarios where, so my consulting domain, emailvirtuoso.com, I registered that last fall. So going back to the purple shirt example of, did I need to send an email at the time? No. So I right away in 3 minutes, only because I knew what to do, I created specific SVF, DKIM, and DMARC records. Everything registered 5 minutes, I was done. I quote unquote parked the domain and forgot about it for months. So Shelby's question, it depends. And usually when I'm in doubt, so like Brian and I have talked about DMARC and BIMI for years, but if I had a long day or I didn't sleep well the night before, I'll talk to the Redshift team like Jack said, and if you're not sure, just ask. Don't assume you know what to do so you don't make a mistake. So it depends on the scenario.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I would say you never want to start with a policy of none unless you are absolutely confident the domain does not send any legitimate email. You know it's a web domain that doesn't send email. You know it's a retired domain. But I've worked with so many clients over the last 13, 14, 15 years I've been in the DMARC space. A lot of people think that domains don't send email, and they actually do. And the way to validate that is with the DMARC record. So no downside to putting a DMARC record in place with a policy of none. If you are absolutely sure it doesn't send an email, yes, publish an SPF minus all record for the domain, publish a reject record. But I would almost always take kind of the most risk-averse approach, which is start with a policy of none, make sure you don't see anything for 2 to 4 weeks, and then move along your progression. And the nice thing about doing all the hard work about progressing your domain to a policy of quarantine reject is you get the cherry on top of the sundae, which to me is BIMI with VMC. So why not take advantage of logo display in mailbox clients like Google and Yahoo, coming soon to Comcast, I believe. Why Apple domains? Why not take advantage of that visual identifier that is literally, kind of a trust indicator. If I get a message in my Gmail client, it's from a brand, has their logo, has the verified tick box next to it, which is what BIMI with VMC adds, I'm more likely to interact with that email. And so I don't see any downside now. If you've done the hard work of getting your domain compliant, if you know you authenticate all your mail, why not look at BIMI with VMC as the reward? And hey, tell your IT team, get them involved if you're in marketing, and just say, look, this provides us with better delivery, provides us with better brand visibility. Why not do BIMI with VMC? There's a new innovation called a common mark certificate, which is for folks that don't have a registered trademark for the logo they want to use in email. There's something new called a common mark certificate that's appropriate for those use cases. Currently used by Gmail, may see that extended to other providers. I think it's fair to say that we might see BIMI extended. So Microsoft is the big holdout between Google and Yahoo today on not supporting BIMI. Is it fair to say that Microsoft will support BIMI down the road? I think it is. I wish I could give you a time frame. Microsoft always says they're looking at BIMI. If I had to guess, would be sometime in 2026. Now that they've come out with their center requirements. So.
And that is how it became BIMI Brothers a few years ago. Yeah. I was going to mention it in the chat, but I saved it for later in case we had time. But how we got the funny name is because I think in 2016, back when I worked at LinkedIn and Brian was still here, we presented a case study on Bimmy on the effectiveness of kind of like teasing a kid with candy, but you want the candy, implement a strong DMARC policy, and then you get the candy, which is Bimmy. So I think back then I shared what I could share from the LinkedIn perspective, but also a previous job at Wish, I got to walk through the process from start to finish of how Bimmy worked, the advantages, disadvantages, stuff like that. So yeah.
Great. And now our educated attendees have not been shy about asking Q&A. We'll take a few more for another few minutes. Chip, you had something earlier that we didn't even include in our prognostications, which is yes, there are innovations in the future around email auth, like DKIM 2, the new version of the DMARC spec coming, version 2.0, if you will, called DMARC BIS. Yes, there's all sorts of stuff outside of Bimmy that are going to be happening outside of center requirements to definitely keep an eye on. Yeah, I think this space is going to continue to evolve, just like emails evolved over the last 15, 20 years. Legitimate marketers employ new creative strategies. Malicious actors mimic those strategies and evolve and adapt. The good centers evolve and adapt. So it's always an arms race. I think you've been well positioned, Udoma, but between both worlds. But we're going to continue to see mailbox providers protect their users from unwanted mail. We're going to continue to see malicious actors try to work their way around those protections, and we're going to continue to see industry organizations and groups like MOG and other center organizations like the ESPC continue to try to make the world a little better for everybody. But I think most well-meaning folks in this industry have the same goal, which is to ensure that wanted email is received, bad email is not, and that we provide the best experience for our shared customers. That's people that send the email and users who receive the email. But anything you want to wrap up with?
No. We're brothers, so we're a team. I think one thing we're trying to say is Microsoft's recent enforcements shouldn't probably shake the internet as much as, I can't remember who was first, Yahoo, Google, but take a step back, look at your domain portfolio. I would rather spend one extra day to make sure I know all the domains my business uses or company, be it 5, 10, 20,000 domains. You'd be surprised. It's safer to know where all your domains sit, have an inventory, whether it's a pretty spreadsheet or a pretty UI, whatever it is, understand understand what each domain uses at X point in time, and then go from there. Like Shelby's question, don't make it too complicated. If you have questions, Brian and I and the rest of the team are here to help your DMARC enforcement highway. So I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Great. Well, that will wrap up. We really appreciate everybody joining. Really appreciate the great questions in the chat. Look forward to seeing you all on the road to DMARC enforcement and Bimmy. And yeah, you should receive the recording of this webinar shortly in your inbox. And if you have any other questions, please do reach out. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your week.
Same here. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.